What's up, y'all? You know what time it is? It's about to be that time.
Damn, son, where'd you find this?
And we're back. One Piece 1094 is out, and what a chapter. Wow. This is sensational work from Oda. The exact level of tension that I have been waiting for, going back to reading Thriller Bark weekly, is the same feel that I'm getting here. When Kuma showed up after they had defeated Moria, that's what this feels like. That tension of anything can happen. And you don't really get that a lot of times in One Piece. You know, most of the time you're like, all right, you know what? Everybody's going to get out of here alive. Everybody's going to get out of here okay. But actually, Saturn came onto the scene and immediately murdered a Marine. So it's like, what's really going to happen here? Ultimately, if Kuma does arrive, I think that Kuma's going to be the death of the arc. And that's going to be, you know, very sad and depressing. But we got a ton of new devil fruits in this chapter. We got Oda keeping up the clamshell imagery for otters, going all the way back to Mr. 13, who used to walk around with a clamshell. Now we have unnamed Vice Admiral number 7, who has the otter fruit and a giant clamshell on a stick, and that's his weapon. We also have Bluegrass, formerly known as Mannequin, turning the pacifistas into mechanical bulls as she lives out the Marvel vs. Capcom 2 character select screen with the Ride fruit. She's gonna take you for a ride. Speaking of bulls.
Fine. I'll do it myself.
Okay, we've got Saturn on the scene, making a move. And he has traded his 8 rings for 8 legs. The man who casually referred to humans as insects is actually a spider. Go figure. And this brought me back to the days of researching Wano, because this is very clearly a yokai, and not just any yokai, the Ushi Oni. Other people have probably talked about this, but I don't know if they're going to go into the depths that I will in this particular video, and how I'm also going to tie it into Imu, and vaguely the other Gorosei. That's what most of this video is going to be about. I want to talk about a couple of other things firsthand. One of the things that I have been waiting for with Bonnie is a parallel of her introduction. When we first met her on the archipelago, she was a character, and we've talked about this, and I wanted it to tie into Zoro. Zoro was about to cut down Charlos, right? But Bonnie stepped in, grabbed Zoro, and explained everything about the Celestial Dragons to him. Like, you cannot hurt these guys, right? So I was expecting a play where Saturn was going to come, and Zoro would be the one to protect Bonnie from Saturn and actually get a slice in on a Gorosei, a celestial dragon of the highest order, right? And that would be the parallel. Oda said, no, I'll do you one better. Bonnie is going to pick up a sword off the ground and stab this celestial dragon herself. This is totally just a inversion of what happened during the archipelago, and I love it. I really love it. Bonnie has turned into an amazing character. The near-death experience moment is just wild. You know, it gives me vibes going back to the breeze breath gun that Mr. 5 had. She just pulls a gun out and like gives this guy a near-death experience. Really fun. Still need to understand the full parameters of what these powers are and what they can do. But as she's attacking Saturn, we're hearing voices and everything. And initially I was like, was Bonnie involved in all of this? Was she there when all of this went down? But then I remembered, no, of course she's not. She went into the paw room and tapped into Kuma's memories. So what she is doing is she is having a visceral reaction to what she saw in Kuma's mind. And that's why it's no smoke, instantly I'm going after Saturn. She knows who this dude is because of Kuma's memories. The collection of characters that are in front of Saturn right now, very eclectic. I really like this. But it's also very targeted and very specified. You have Frankie, who has, you know, he's one of the science bros of the crew. He trained on Vegapunk's island. You have Vegapunk, you have Atlas, you have Sanji, who is a genetically modified being, okay? Whether he was considered a failure or not, we know that all of the things that Judge did to Sanji actually took and just needed the raid suit to activate it. So we've really got a hardcore science squad here, including Bonnie, who is the daughter of Kuma. This is exactly who should be in this particular situation. But Sanji and Frankie are definitely taking an L here. There's no way to get out of this without taking that L. And that's going to make the W sweeter. I do not want a win here for these guys at all. As much as I love Sanji and Frankie, what I really want is a super downbeat moment. Like, I really want to amp the tension up here. Like, I want Saturn to kill Atlas, rip her in half. I want him to heavily damage Frankie to the point where we really get that Bionic Man moment. We have the technology, we can rebuild him, and we get this crazy powered up Frankie for the final saga. And Sanji needs to, hopefully learn something about what's going on with his body and something that can trigger a fight maybe later on, maybe a rematch with Saturn. Maybe this is Sanji's opponent later. Especially considering that Sanji fought Queen, and at the end of Zou, the ships that came to rescue Jack were Queen's ships, and the figurehead had a scorpion on it, implying that Oda's original plan was for Queen to have an ancient scorpion devil fruit, and changed it later on. Maybe too many people caught on and was like, all right, fine, I'll make this guy a brontosaurus. But here, now Sanji will actually get to fight an 8-legged creature, which, if we go all the way back to Jaya, Sanji is afraid of spiders. So this is gonna be fun. We're gonna get into some really exciting stuff here, but let's actually break down the Ushi Oni and everything else that really could be compiled into Saturn. We're gonna see situations and scenarios from the folklore and basically break down what his power set could and or should be based on that. And generally speaking, when we used to do this for Wano, a lot of times it ended up being the case. So we're back at it. Here we go. But first, like, comment, subscribe if you are feeling the vibe. A pentagram appears on the ground and Saturn rises from it, signaling the start of spooky season. And speaking of that, during 3D2Y when Kuma slapped Brook, where did he land? In the middle of a pentagram while a ritual was being conducted to raise the Lord of Hell. And then they all thought that Brook was that guy. Is this a callback to that? Potentially. One big callback is if we can go to chapter 233, the introduction of the Gorosei, you will actually see, and in every scene with the Gorosei, on the walls are pentagrams. And what is a pentagram? It is something with 5 sides, 5 elders. Oh man, numbers, math piece. Come on, Oda. But seriously, with all of the religions that are tied within One Piece and references that are made to mythology, getting into some of this like demonic stuff feels like a natural succession for Oda to do in the story. And to have the highest authority in the world be involved in the dark arts when we have things like devil fruits, it feels like something we should have caught on to a lot sooner. But that's the best thing about Oda, is when he gives us these moments where it's like, duh. And the very first Gorosei devil fruit that we are seeing in the story is an Ushi. A bull, an Ushi Oni. And the very first Zoan devil fruit that we ever saw in the series at all, right? The very first transformation was in Drum. And you know who it was? It was Dalton, who has the Ushi Ushi no Mi model bison. This is the first Zoan devil fruit. Some people think it's Chopper, but we actually didn't see Chopper transform or learn about him until a little bit later. So it is actually technically Dalton, and that's kind of interesting. And I wonder if there's a pattern that'll be drawn from that. Like maybe the first 5 Gorosei will be variations of the very first 5 Zoans we saw. So one of them will be a Hito Hito no Mi model blank. Maybe one of them will be some sort of a bird or a falcon like Pell, a dog like Chaka. It's very interesting. I don't necessarily believe it, completely, but it's a fun thing to think of. But on top of that, it also goes into the idea of, is it really a devil fruit? Or are these guys actual demons that the devil fruits are born from? And this gets even deeper as we dive into the Ushi-Oni and associated yokai. The Ushi-Oni is a mountain-dwelling savage that can also be found on beaches. When travelers would come across one, they would not be able to avert their gaze. There was something almost Medusa-like about looking at one. And we see an aspect of that in this particular chapter when that one Marine is like, hey man, I want to catch a look. And then he gets basically Whitebeard Akainu'd, right? Like he gets his head blown off, which is wild. Now, nothing essentially in the Ushi-Oni story says that, they can kind of do what that woman in the boys does and just like pop heads. But when you catch the gaze of an Ushi-Oni, essentially it has the ability to eat shadows and eat souls. So maybe that's what's happening there, unless it's really bloody. I don't know, because I'm actually very concerned that the anime won't actually show that. Because it's like one of those graphic things, like the anime did not take off Whitebeard's face. The anime did not have Zeph eat his own leg. So I don't expect the anime to have someone's head get basically just like popped off. But nevertheless, an Ushi-Oni is able to drain one's shadow, able to drain one's soul. They are very poisonous creatures that are known for incurable illnesses, which, that line in itself, incurable illness, is something that has come up across the story numerous times when talking about Roger. Did he have a run-in with Saturn or the Goray? Is that how he got his incurable illness? Did it start kind of around God Valley and then eventually progressed? There's a lot of time in between God Valley and, actually the illness taking hold, so maybe it was somewhere else along the line, but we need more context, right? Aside from eating shadows and drinking souls, the Ushi-Oni sometimes likes to lick a shadow on the ground, giving someone an incredibly high fever, which does lead to death a few days later. One of the famous folklores regarding the Ushi-Oni is, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase this and pare it down, there was a lord of a particular prefecture, and he shot an arrow at an Ushi-Oni, and because he did that, he was cursed, and his wife fell ill with an incurable illness, and she died. So the way to understand and translate that particular story is that someone attacks the Ushi-Oni, and then someone that is very close and near and dear to the person that attacked it gets hurt, right? So in this case, the Lord attacked the Ushi-Oni, his wife died. In this case, Bonnie attacks the Ushi-Oni. Kuma is going to feel the wrath. Kuma is on his way to Egghead. He's probably going to be used as a device to save Bonnie and maybe others as well. He will sacrifice his life. We already saw him fighting against Akainu, and it didn't go well for him, to the point where it's heavily implied that he may have even lost a foot. And he's already lost himself to begin with. And there are so many theories out there trying to figure out what's going to happen to his fruit. Did his fruit have something to do with the past? Was it used to set the poneglyphs all over the world, right? Did Nefertari D. Lily have that fruit? I'm a big believer in that, right? There's a lot of people for years that have felt that Vivi could end up with this fruit. We've talked about this before. I'm not going to really go into the whole 2-9 of it all, but just know that there's a lot of evidence to that. And with Vivi on her way here, if Kuma dies, then, maybe that fruit could materialize into a, just regular piece of fruit that's on Morgan's blimp as she's eating, and then that's how she gets the fruit, or somebody else, whatever. Either way, we need to keep this fruit alive for the end game of the story, and Kuma, there's a lot of death flags. It's going to be sad, it's going to be emotional, we'll get his, his backstory. Oda will probably do it after he's already sacrificed himself, which, that's how Oda tends to do it, right? We got ASL after Ace died, but it would have been better if we got it before. We'll see what happens. One interesting thing that I learned about the Ushionis is that if they do a good deed, they will die. There's a story about how an Ushioni saved a young boy, and deep red blood started to just spurt from the Ushioni, and it basically just melted and disappeared because it helped a human. So there's a scenario potentially down the line that if any of the Gorosei, say Saturn, right, turns against Imu and protects one of our guys or something along those lines, it would just randomly die because of this, because that is in line with the folklore. Hopefully you understand the way I'm kind of processing these things, right? I'm taking the story of the Ushioni, which is very obviously what this is. I mean, just look at the image. This is Saturn. And then kind of finding ways that Oda could potentially incorporate it. Now, a very interesting thing while also researching this is that the Ushioni is tied very closely to the Norona and the Iso-ona. Now, the Norona is something that we talked about a lot during Wano, because you had characters like Sarahebi, the teacher, who, could turn their face into a snake or, extend their neck. And then you had literally a character named Norona, which was one of Black Maria's people. Other examples of Norona in the story would also be Marigold and Sandersonia. But that is a really famous yokai, and it is a vampiric sea serpent. And they run in packs with Ushionis, who are along the beach a lot of the times. And one thing that is really interesting to note about this, the Norona is vampiric, right? Which signals long life, immortality. And if Imu were to be some sort of a snake, which we know that there has to be some sort of snake in this creation story of One Piece. We have Adam trees, Eve trees. We're definitely going to deal with a snake tempting someone with the forbidden fruit, right? We have devil fruits here. It's gonna happen. Is Imu the snake, right? Are they a Norona? We were just told recently that Imu's real name is Norona Imu. Norona Norona, right? It's too close, guys. It's too close. There's going to be something about the Norona amongst the Gorosei and potentially Imu for sure. There's a bunch of stuff. I've been seeing a lot of things online now, and a lot of people in the stream were bringing up the Umebozu, which has come up a lot. Even in the story, they referred to Waratsumi as an Umebozu, kind of as a joke, right? But an Umebozu is an ink-like gigantic creature where you can kind of only see the eyes. So I see why people would draw that comparison to Imu, but I don't necessarily know if that's the direction we're going to go. And I really like this idea of it being the Norona just because of, the wordplay there, Norona. But on top of that, it would kind of solidify in my mind whether Imu was actually male or female, because the Norona has woman in the name. Like, it would mean that Imu actually is a woman, which would be interesting. Could we be completely wrong about this? Absolutely. And I'm not going to, lose a wink of sleep for being wrong about it, but it's still really interesting. More on the idea of Imu being a woman, Brandon King brought up in the stream the yokai Yao Bikuni, which is a legendary nun who lived for 800 years, but retained their youthful appearance as a young woman throughout their whole life. And the perpetual youth and beauty were attained by accidentally eating the flesh of a mermaid, which is said to grant eternal life. Now, this is interesting when we're talking about eternal life and the perpetual youth operation with the Obi Obi no Mi, but then there's also the apology note to the original Poseidon. Did Joy Boy let the original Poseidon get eaten, and that is what gave Imu eternal life? It's a very interesting idea, and also important to note that the Yaobukuni got the mermaid meat from Ryugu, which is the name of the kingdom at Fishman Island. But ultimately, with this chapter, I just really love that the tension was ramped up. There's a lot of dread here. Obviously, Luffy and Kizaru's fight is now closed. essentially. So Luffy is out, and hopefully he remains that way, similar to the end of Thriller Bark. Could this be Sanji's nothing happened moment? He did say that the world government would look at him as one of the biggest threats in the crew. This could be that moment, right? If he manages to harm the Gorosei in, some crazy way, but still doesn't get the win, he could get a meteoric bounty rise. And as a Sanji fan, I'm here for it. I still want him to get the L, though, because we can't deflate the importance of the Gorosei at this time. We need them to be at this upper echelon that we need to work toward. I was saying it in the stream, but we need to catch these L's so that the W's are sweeter. We need it. We need it, especially at this point in the story when we're in the final saga. We need a downbeat so we can rise up. And this feels like it really could be it. I still believe that Dragon and the Revolutionary Army will play a role in this arc, and I want to see Dragon in chapter 1100, 1,000 chapters from his introduction. We can also get Sabo, just like Ace did with all of the Billion ships, taking out a bunch of these Marine ships, easing a little bit of this tension for the escape as we're getting out. If anybody does get poisoned by Saturn, assuming that, like the Uchioni, Saturn is able to poison people, then we would have Ivankov potentially there to heal the poison. But on top of that, what I would actually really love is that Saturn's poison is so strong that Ivankov would have a really tough time dealing with it. An even tougher time than Ivankov had dealing with Magellan's poison. Also, if we're tying Mads together and for whatever reason Germa gets involved here and we use Reiju as that, it would be great if Reiju was able to remove the poison, but then unlike what happened with Luffy with the poison fish and, it didn't mean anything to her, she would then get poisoned and then it would be a thing where now we have to figure out a way to help Reiju, or maybe Reiju dies. That we just got to amp the tension here. We got to make sure that these guys are so broken that when we beat them, it's so sweet. Blackbeard pirates are still somewhere in the vicinity of Egghead or on it, and I'm hoping in the next 2 chapters we actually kind of figure out what that is. And then by 1097, 1000 chapters from Smoker, I want a Smoker update. And then for 1103, 1000 chapters from Vivi's introduction, that's when I want the blimp to arrive. Either way, there are a lot of opportunities for very exciting things to come in the Egghead arc. I want the next chapter to follow up on the tension in this chapter. I do not want it to get deflated, kind of like how when Kaido came down after Luffy had died, right? But then in the same chapter, in the next chapter, Luffy resurrects himself, deflating the entire tension. I want to sit in this for a little bit. Kind of like how at the end of Thriller Bark, we sat in it for a couple of chapters. That's what I want here. I'm excited to see where things go. In the meantime, that's it for this week, guys. We'll be back for 1095 next Sunday. We'll be streaming at our normal time. Hopefully we'll get the analysis for that one, the following day as well. But this is a good chapter, people. This is a monumental chapter. This is what I've been waiting for. I'm really excited about these developments. Oda, don't let me down. Keep it up. Have Saturn kill somebody here. Let's really amp these stakes. Yes. All right, guys. Like, comment, subscribe if you're feeling the vibe. And thanks for hanging out. Bye.
I've been swimming deep, savage.